In the spring of 1863, the war in the East was going abysmal for the North, specifically the Army of the Potomac, commanded by General Joseph Hooker. Robert E. Lee, commanding the Army of Northern Virginia, had delivered a crushing defeat to the Army of the Potomac at the Battle of Fredericksburg in December of 1862, then at the Battle of Chancellorsville in late April, early May of 1863. However, as things in the East were abysmal, events in the West were the only thing keeping the North dedicated to the war. General Ulysses S. Grant and his Army of the Tennessee were defeating the Confederate Western armies at the battles of Shiloh, Fort Donelson, and Fort Henry. To the fear of the Confederate government, however, Grant was laying siege to the rail hub of Vicksburg, Mississippi, the last portion of the Mississippi River, to finally split the Confederacy in two. At last, achieving Winfield Scott's Anaconda Plan, specifically the western half, cutting off trade to the Confederacy. Robert E. Lee needs to make a way to end the war sooner with an armistice between the North and South, to officially have the North recognize the South as a sovereign nation. With 75,000 men, he marched his army of Northern Virginia across the Potomac in the daring Second Invasion of the North on June 3rd, 1863. Using the Blue Ridge Mountains, they screened their movements into Maryland and Pennsylvania, deep into Northern territory. The objective is to draw the Union Army of the Potomac north of Washington, D.C., and destroy the army, then march on Washington from the north and impose an official peace and bring the war to an end. In Washington, D.C., President Lincoln and Secretary of War Stanton ordered General Hooker to move his army over 90,000 strong to pursue Lee and push him out of the North. Hooker moves two of his corps to march defensively past Washington, while ordering his cavalry corps under General Alfred Pleasonton to find Lee and his army. In Pennsylvania, the governor, Andrew Gregg Curtin, called for the defense of the state, amassing a militia army of 8,000 men at Harrisburg to stop Robert E. Lee and his army at the Susquehanna River. Hooker wrote to Washington, however, demanding that the garrisons in Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, be redeployed to aid the Army of the Potomac. He was denied several times and then offered his resignation in protest, which the government happily accepted, removing him from command of the army. A provost marshal was then sent on the evening of the 27th of June to Frederick, Maryland, to the encampment of the Union 5th Corps of General George G. Meade. On the 28th of June, Meade was officially named as the commander of the Army of the Potomac, and Meade quickly had to figure out where his 7 corps were, but more importantly, where Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia was. Lee, on the other hand, was having quite his own issues. He had lost contact with Jeb Stuart, the commander of the cavalry division that he famously referred to as the eyes of his army. Consulting with his corps commanders, he decided to finally converge the army into a position to take stock and figure out the next moves. Observing all roads in southern Pennsylvania and northern Maryland converged on a single town, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Delivering strict orders, he commanded his corps to not engage with the enemy until the full army is concentrated. On June 26, elements of the Confederate Second Corps had occupied Gettysburg, in fact, but they pulled out when his aims were not met. On June 30th, 1863, General John Buford, in command of one of Pleasonton's cavalry divisions, entered Gettysburg with 4,544 men of his 1st Division. He soon discovered, after entering the town, that scouts from Confederate General Henry Heath's division had been to the town earlier in the day and seemed to be returning the next day. Without hesitation, Buford sent out requests to the commander of the Army of the Potomac's left wing. The left wing was under the command of General John Reynolds, who was commanding his own 1st Union Corps, along with the 3rd Corps of General Daniel Sickles and the 11th Corps under Oliver O. Howard. Buford beseeched Reynolds to move his left wing, some 31,951 men, to Gettysburg to help seize the ridges from the oncoming Army of Northern Virginia. He also sent dispatches to Generals Winfield Scott Hancock, who was in northern Maryland with his 2nd Corps, and also to General Meade himself, who had recently taken command in Frederick, Maryland, and informed both men of the situation. Back in the Army of Northern Virginia, Robert E. Lee has recently discovered the change of command of the Army of the Potomac to George Meade, a man he only knew by reputation and background. He assumed a cautious adversary. However, Meade, who had proven his skills as a commander, knew a very important lesson of command, and that was delegation, and he put his trust into his subordinate and friend, John F. Reynolds, to control the situation until his arrival to Gettysburg. He also directed Hancock, another of his trusted lieutenants, and the 2nd Corps to move to Gettysburg with all haste to support the coming fight. Meade, who was a surprise to everyone to be promoted, then contacted his other corps to move with all speed to the small Pennsylvania town and prepare for a fight. Back in Gettysburg, Buford gave the order to begin the evacuation of citizens, or at least stay in cover. He also then deployed his divisions across the north and northwest of the town, holding the ridges. His pickets are now sitting only a few yards from the camps of General A.P. Hill's Confederate 3rd Corps. And in the morning, the 3 bloodiest days on American soil will begin with a thunder.